This episode of Let's Go with chornspikes is brought to you by the Chorn Store. It's a collection of items I use almost every single day along my spike ball journey, and I know will be helpful to you too. All brought to you by the convenience of Amazon. Today's featured Chorn pick is Liquid IV. I don't know about you, I'm always dehydrated. I've always been one of those people that's dying at tournaments. Maybe not as much as Zach Vance, but I'm also up there. I remember playing a tournament in 2015 that I actually don't remember. I was basically blacking out and throwing up the entire time. So don't do that. That would be bad. I wish I had Liquid IV back then. It's something that I've just been trying out for the last 24 days, and let me tell you, it makes all the difference in the world. If you're sick of being dehydrated at tournaments, this is surely the solution for you. I don't know the science behind it, but athletes everywhere are using it. Joe Rogan highly recommends it. That's how I got turned on to it. And it's a hydration multiplier that turns one glass of water into 3, basically. Basically, your body just absorbs even more of the water and retains it, so it prevents you from getting dehydrated in the first place. How? Again, no idea. But I can tell you I feel the difference every single morning when I'm using it. That is how I start every morning. I throw it in one of these blender bottles and chug that before I have any of my coffee or anything, and haven't been dehydrated in like the last 24 days that I have been trying this out, and I'm training as hard as I ever have. For the low price of like $1 to $2 a stick, depending how many you buy at a time, you can completely curb dehydration. It's literally insane. So go ahead and check out Liquid IV in the Chorn Store, link in the description/show notes, and stop being dehydrated while you play, or stop being dehydrated every single day. While you're there, feel free to check out the other supplements that I take every single day of the week in the Supplement Your Success corner of the store, as well as other things I use while training and streaming if you want to get into that. Most items are available in 2 days with Amazon Prime, and while you're at it, link your Amazon Prime account to Twitch in order to receive a free sub every month that you can use on your favorite streamer. Me. All right, here's the show. Let's go! Come on! Hello. What's up, my dude?
How's it going?
It's going all right. This is Andrew Card, by the way, if you're listening in your earphones here, of Trippy Lizard. Did you make it home from New York today?
I did. I didn't go to New York. I just went to the Northern Kentucky tournament.
Oh, it was Northern Kentucky. Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
it was weird because it's in KY, so it's
right.
like it's confusing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I somehow got New York out of that. I was like, oh wow, like New York is running a tournament. That's weird.
yeah. New York would have been a trek for me.
Yeah, I was like, how is he gonna get back and do this podcast? But I was like, I'm not gonna ask any questions. How was the tournament?
It was good. It was supposed to storm like I think the day before the weather said there was like 80% chance of storms like every single hour, and so
Yeah.
I was not looking forward to it. And then we got there, and it like rained for maybe 30 minutes on and off, and then we were good to go. So it was a good day overall. It was really fun.
Yeah, I saw it started coming down a little bit better towards the like finals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that. You always want to be able to make it through the tournament without the rain, but it always comes. Was that a big factor with serves at all? I mean, I know you were playing a very serve heavy team, especially with Thomas. So
Yeah.
did that affect spin a lot or no?
Honestly, I don't think it did that much. It didn't rain a ton. It just rained like really heavy for a small period of time. And so I think pretty much everyone was still getting motion off the net in terms of cuts and everything. Maybe not to the extent you would if it was completely dry,
Sure.
but I didn't notice it being a problem because usually when it's really bad, there'll be a bunch of roll ups, a bunch of pockets, and I didn't notice too many like abnormal in that department.
Oh, yeah, I guess that's good. I guess I didn't really have enough time to like saturate the nets, because I remember like that one Boston tournament, like Tyler kept trying to get action off the net when he was playing anchored, and just like his serve just did nothing because it rained for like 2 straight hours on the net, and it just took everything out of it.
Yeah. Clark and we played one in Columbus in the snow, and that was the hardest serving conditions I've ever played in, just because the ball was sliding so much across the net because it was like snowy and icy, and so you couldn't. It was so hard to land anything. But
Gee, where'd you play a snow tournament?
It was this year, Columbus in March. So it started off pretty good
Oh yeah.
conditions in the morning, and then afternoon just started pouring snow.
Yeah, that was the one that I was gonna go to. I was in New Jersey working a trade show, and then they, declared the national emergency. And
Yeah,
so my plan was to drive back, and Frederick was coming up from Texas, and then basically all of Texas didn't go. So he was like, "Well, I'm not gonna go to the tournament anymore. Everyone's kind of bailing." So then I tried to pick up another partner, and then at some point I was like, this is just too much
yeah,
right now. I mentally can't do this." Well, yeah, and I think the final nail in the coffin was someone was like, "Yeah, it's supposed to for sure rain, but it's also on the border of snow. So, it might be an 8-hour tournament in the snow." And I was like, "No, that's
yeah,
fine. I will just," because I was, sitting there going like, "Man, we might not play spike ball for like a couple of months. Like that I should probably
yeah,
I should probably squeeze one in real quick." But
yeah.
that
You
one
made a
did
good call. It was miserable conditions. Like my feet were numb. It was terrible.
Yeah, well, because it like snowed the entire time, right? So it wasn't even just
Yes,
like
it was, and it was muddy, and it started like it was just so cold and snowy and just terrible. Don't even want to think about it.
Yeah, it's funny. I went to Colorado once to play a snow tournament, like at least attempting to, beginning of 2016. We went in January. It was like end of January. We got like flights for like $47 because who's flying to Colorado in January, you know?
Gosh.
And,
Yeah.
and and Dylan and I were like, "Oh, it'll be fun, we'll just go hang out with the Colorado guys." And I think like Jenna and Harding said they were gonna go up and play in it. And then Jenna, like her flight got canceled or something like that. So then Harding didn't go. Um, and we get to Colorado and it's like low 50s. Um, all the snow has completely melted. And so we're basically just playing in like a mud pit.
Ooh,
So that was interesting. But yeah, so still have yet to play a snow tournament, which is wild.
yeah. I wouldn't recommend it, but I mean, once you've done it, it's kind of like a badge of honor, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I kind of just want that in my arsenal of like, yeah, I did this at some point.
Yeah.
Lord. So you have actually been competing throughout a lot of this stuff and going to a lot of the independent events. How has that been? Because I have taken the opposite approach.
Yeah. So I took a good break from that Columbus tournament. I don't think I played one in April or May. And then the first one I did back was the very end of June in Chattanooga.
Hmm.
And that was one I was more comfortable with because I wasn't traveling. Um, and at that point, I had just grown more comfortable with my thinking. I mean, I respect anybody's opinion, because obviously, it's a big deal and
Right.
everybody takes it differently. But at that point, I was comfortable being outside in the open air and keeping my distance as best as I could. That
Right.
was comfortable for me, and so I made the decision to play that one in Chattanooga in June, and then this North Carolina, or not North Carolina, Northern Kentucky one was my second one back.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I thought you had played more, but maybe I'm just thinking of Coleman because I know he's been
yeah,
everywhere. Um, but yeah, like so I guess you haven't really even gone that far. Just Northern Kentucky then.
yeah. Just Northern Kentucky and Chattanooga.
Yeah. It have you found it like different socially at the tournaments to like not like be interacting quite as close to people or
Um, for me, it's definitely different just because I try to stay aware of it and try to keep my distance.
Mhm.
But in terms of like, I think the Chattanooga one was definitely spaced out and there was no crowds. And there was one point where it started pouring down rain. Everybody had to get under cover, and that was the only time we were in group. But it was a big awning, so we had enough space to space out.
Right.
Um, but this past weekend, I didn't. It wasn't bad. I mean, I didn't really notice anything different from a normal tournament in terms of like morning announcements. I thought everybody was pretty much the same space they would be at a regular tournament. Um, but other than that, everybody had their own tent. So when it rained, we weren't all crowded under one really.
Mm.
We were able to space out a little bit. So I didn't notice anything that I was like, oh man, this is probably really bad that we're all super tight. But also at the same time, I didn't notice anything different from a regular event, I would say.
Right. Well, I mean, just even like socially, like, we use so many high fives and so many like, just like hugs and stuff like that. Like, was that at
Yeah.
least more on the different end, at least for you?
Yeah, I think that was different. There was definitely less hugs, more of like fist pounds and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, now that you say that, I can definitely notice that being different. Um, but yeah, I didn't know. I was just more concerned about myself in terms of distancing, so I knew that was different for
Yeah.
me. I didn't really pay attention for it for everybody else, but um, yeah,
Yeah. It's an interesting time for all of this because you just have, so many people with, different schools of thought. And I think I'm like way on
hmm
the conservative end. I think there are some people that are just blatantly not caring, and that's pretty rough.
yeah,
Um, but it is good to see that like at least some of these things have, you know, at least pervade a little bit into our scene and people are being, like somewhat responsible. Um,
yeah.
so that's
And I
good.
think, yeah, I think I'm a bit subconsciously affected because my work is considered an essential business. And so I'm already around people. And so I think subconsciously my brain is like, oh, okay, it's kind of okay to be around people where I don't realize the risk maybe as much as I should or as much as I need to.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe subconsciously that's something that could be an effect just because I'm around people every day of the week just at work because we're considered essential. And so when it comes to the weekends, I might think, oh, it's okay to, go play tournaments and stuff. So
Right. Yeah. I mean, all of that's, true. And I think it's true the other way. Like I've been maintaining my distance like so much that like I forget that like even when I'm like around my parents or something like that, like we're all keeping our
mm-hmm.
circles like to our houses and then like immediate family. And so like I'll,
Mm-hmm.
I'll be trying to like, overly stay like 6 feet apart because I'm just like, all right, I'm really trying to, do that. Or even like, the couple times that I've, practiced and stuff like that, like I'm trying to maintain it, but then also I'm like, well, I'm also playing literally around a net. Like you're bumping up against people while you play and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Like it's impossible to maintain 6 feet and play. It's also impossible to play with a mask.
Yeah.
And play, hard anyway, like actually compete. Um,
Yeah.
which has been an interesting, dynamic for me. Like personally, I'm not practicing right now with the Chicago people because the majority of them went up to that Livonia tournament last
Okay.
weekend. So I've decided like I'm, totally good on them. They haven't done anything wrong or anything, but I'm just like
Yeah.
I'm just gonna make sure that I'm good here. I'll wait 2 weeks and make sure that that wasn't at least the cause of any exposure that I get here.
For
Um,
sure.
and so yeah, I've been definitely missing the practice element right now.
Mm.
I had just finally gotten back to like, playing with people like once or twice a week. And now I'm relegated to my basement again and I'm like, "Oh no." And then I, watch a tournament like, you know, what you guys did in Northern Kentucky and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that looks so much fun." Like
Yeah.
the jealousy is real for sure.
Yeah. I definitely felt that. And then in the couple months I took off, and maybe even that might have even been a small factor in deciding to go back and play. But it's
Yeah.
definitely it's a such a hard line to toe between being really responsible because this is a really serious issue, and then also taking care of yourself and what you need to do in
Right.
terms of like maintaining mental health and all that stuff. So there's so many different facets that go all into your decisions that I think it's not a cut and dry decision for everyone. Everyone has their own opinion and their own needs for
Right.
sure.
Well, and I was talking to some other people about this. Like, I think people, some people are tightening up in certain areas of their lives and loosening up in others, and all in an attempt to mitigate their overall risk. And so, my when I was talking to like my aunt and uncles about, the fact that I'm practicing, they're like, "Oh my God, you're practicing," and I was like, yeah, like I have to do that and create like some rules to make that like not go wildly out of control where like all of a sudden I'm at basically a tour stop or something like that. But
Yeah.
at the same time, then I'm like over tightening up in, other areas where I'm like I don't go inside a Dunkin' Donuts. Like I will only drive through it. And like the only place I go in is like a grocery store or like a
hmm
hardware store. Like if I can drive up, I do. And so, um, you know, I think that's probably like overly cautious. If you're wearing a mask and you're in a
Yeah.
store, you're probably good as long as you're not dilly dallying. And so, it's it it's been interesting to see what where people are willing to take their risks, and then, to what extent. And then, you don't know what the other person's doing in all their other personal choices. So
Yeah.
like, someone like Coleman who's going to all of these events, like, I don't know what he's doing privately. Like maybe he's tightened up in a bunch of other places and this
Yeah.
feels like it's good to him. Like no, no judgment here. I can't speak for anybody else, but I think everyone's got to, pick their limits on safety.
Yeah, I agree. And especially I think our regions of the country probably have uh, an effect on our decisions too, because I know in the South things are
They're heating
really,
up.
really loose and
Yeah.
probably a lot looser than they need to be, especially like Georgia and Florida. I think, just my opinion,
Yeah.
but and then other areas like California and other areas that are really strict, obviously have different guidelines now. So I think those things can also affect your thinking as a whole of what you need to be doing. And so I think that's why I think we've seen overall a lot more Southern players traveling for tournaments at this time
Mm-hmm.
compared to like California players or Midwest players. And I think that could have a big role in their decisions just because what their state government is telling them is okay and not okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, we're social creatures. Like you kind of mimic what you see around. And like, I mean, there's reports that like in, Jacksonville, Florida, it's like 5% of people are wearing masks when you go outside and sample versus like
Yeah.
here, it's like over 95. Like 95% of
Hmm.
people have a mask on in the parking lot, like going up to the
Yeah.
store. Like not even just, immediately ripping it off. Like, and so that just becomes, you know, your new normal. And so my new normal is,
Hmm.
everyone wears a mask, everyone's maintaining social distance for the most part. But if you're not seeing that, you're going like,
Yeah.
it's probably fine. Um, which is just super interesting. Now with you playing some of these,
Hmm.
but fewer than some of these other people that are really grinding in the off season, which again I'm jealous of, and I commend the people that are doing it. Like if you're not
Yeah.
using this time to get better, you're making a huge mistake. And that's where I'm like, all right, so I'm grinding, personally in my basement, but if you can go to these tournaments, like you have a major leg up. So with not competing for so long,
Hmm.
and the serving meta shifting pretty far, especially with the reverse cut, and especially against the people that you played against in this Kentucky tournament.
Yeah.
What was kind of your analysis of like where you stood and where the game's kind of going right now?
Yeah, I could definitely tell in terms of serving that the that area of the game was definitely progressing faster than I had progressed in that area just because I haven't practiced it as much as other people have
Hmm.
over this kind of 3 month period of off season, I guess, where some people go to tournaments, some people don't. And so that's definitely something I noticed. And on the flip side of that, that also affects your serve return. Um, and so that was a big thing because PJ and I in the finals, we lost both the first two games, and we both felt like, or at least I felt like we played incredible around it. Like, didn't have any setting mistakes, didn't have any hitting mistakes. We're getting all kinds of defensive touches and conversions. And I can only think of like one hit off the top of my head the whole match that got dug from us and they put away.
Hmm.
But the scoreboard didn't reflect that because I think um, we hadn't progressed as much in that serving area as Coleman and Thomas have. You can tell they've been working on their serve a lot, and
Hmm.
so they definitely took advantage of that being having a leg up on us in serving because they were definitely the better servers in that match. And then and from what I heard throughout the whole day, they seemed like they were serving well all day, and so props to them for grinding on their game and working on it during the off season
Yeah.
or not off season, but during this
Sure.
time.
Right. Yeah. During at least the break from the tour, if you will. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I found interesting too was that, obviously they were serving really well. I watched, bits and pieces. I kind of scrolled through the game and, especially watched all the extra points and stuff like that because those were, tense
Hmm.
moments, which were great. Um, but, when I think of, those four players around a net, like I think you and PJ have a pretty big leg up in serve receive, especially over, Thomas, although he's vastly improved. But especially,
Hmm.
when you're thinking of last season, I think you and PJ are much better known for your serve receive than Thomas or Coleman, although now Coleman's a monster too. Um, so was was that not enough to make up the difference? And do you think that like given enough knowledge of the meta change and like standing behind a reverse cut mix up a little bit more that would have, changed things over time or no?
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of that. I feel like for the most part we served return well, but there were crucial moments in each game that we didn't return well. So I think in
Mm-hmm.
both games we got up early from defensive touches and defensive breaks, and then they kind of got themselves back in with aces. And then the times where it mattered the most to serve return late in the game,
Yeah.
uh, we got aced. And so I think we were up. I think it was game one. I can't remember if it was game one or two, but we were up 19-17,
Oh
and
wow.
then I think they got two quick aces and got back in the game. And so they they were really clutch and taking advantage of those late game moments. I think our serve return overall was pretty good for how good servers Coleman and Thomas are,
Mm-hmm.
and so I didn't think that was a huge negative for us, but in the crucial moments of the game, we did get ace, and I think that was the ultimate difference. And our defensive touches and defensive gets just couldn't keep up with the pace of their strong serves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, there are a couple ways you can get breaks, and only two of them are in your control. It's basically aces, defensive touches, and then errors on the other team. So,
Yeah,
you can try and force the team into errors, but that's even tough to do. So if you're not getting it defensively, you got to get it with aces. If you're not getting it with aces, you got to get it
yeah,
defensively. So it sounds like it was a little bit more of a battle like that. Um,
yeah. And it was definitely a frustrating moment for me because I don't think I've ever had that feeling of like I'm playing incredible around net right now. Like I feel around net in the sense of like in between the serve and the end of the point. So
hmm
I felt like PJ and I were both playing really, really well, but we still got beat at the end of the game, which was such a weird and frustrating feeling.
Yeah.
Um, but serving is also a huge part of the game right now, and we didn't step up in that department, and that was the difference. So it was definitely a weird feeling.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a world in which the timing of this reverse cut is like really unfortunate because it's going to push the meta even more towards serving at a time when people also aren't going to be able to practice their serve receive. Like I think there's going to be this
Mm,
catch up moment that's going to happen, and like I know at least for me that's going to be the case too because like the strongest part of my serve receive is just experience and knowledge and hours put in and reps in tournaments. Like most people don't have
yeah,
more of those than me. And so the idea that like, everyone's progressing on their serve and I don't get to like slowly work out that reverse cut. Like no one in Chicago has one right now.
mm,
So even when I go to practice, like, I'm seeing like kind of like just bad ones in general that don't really do a whole lot, and don't really, push that much. But not being able to make that adjustment sucks. And meanwhile, they're only going to get
yeah,
even better at it. Like, I I feel for people that are coming into advanced and premier right now and have to deal with these cut serves for the first time
hmm,
because I had the luxury of practicing against the early cut serves, which were kind of like the easy version of that, and
hmm,
then slowly as they progressed through their serve, you got to progress through figuring out how to defend it. So like, when you had to, figure out Dan McPartland's in 2017 and Tyler's in, 2018, like those were just different.
hmm,
And so, what I'm afraid is like, okay, if I don't go to a tournament until 2021, are all these kids going to be able to reverse cut it so hard the other way that like
yeah,
now the knowledge gap is just going to be even harder to get over. And again, I don't think it's insurmountable, but I do think that this timing is unfortunate because I think if you're keeping up with the meta, it's probably not that bad. Is that
yeah,
is that what you're thinking right now with like the reverse cut at least? You guys didn't look like you were like
yeah.
overly like clueless about it or anything.
And that holds true with my experience this past weekend because like PJ has a really good reverse cut, and you could tell the teams that or the players that hadn't seen it before and hadn't returned than players that have, because when he was doing it in the finals, Coleman and Thomas were returning it really well.
Yeah.
So you could tell that they had experience returning it and experience seeing it, while other players really struggled with it, and you could kind of tell that they hadn't seen it. And so the same for me. Like there were some players like Grant Laughlin who was there. He had a really nice reverse cut, and I don't get to practice. Nobody in my area that I practice with has one,
Mm-hmm.
and so whenever I see it, it takes a bit for me to adjust, as opposed to these players who have played a lot of tournaments recently and have seen a lot of reverse cuts are really good, are starting to get really good at returning them. Like Thomas and Coleman did a really great job at returning PJ's reverse cuts, which I
Right.
was super impressed by because he had a lot of motion and a lot of like trickery in terms of looking like his regular cut. And so I was really impressed by their ability to return his reverse.
Yeah. Now, do you think that like at this point it's pretty obvious when people are going for it earlier in the motion or no?
I think there are certain players that it is. I think, um, for example, Addison Powers has one, and he disguises it really well from my perspective. I've gotten to play against him a few times now that I've gone back to a tournament and played pickup with him, and he does a really great job of disguising his regular cut and his reverse cut.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Whereas PJ, I think he has a little more of a tell when he's doing reverse. He swings more higher and straight down.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a little easier to tell. I think, yeah, there's just certain players that do disguise it well, and certain players that you can see they have a tell when they're going for it. And so, like you said, it comes into that experience of going to tournaments and knowing, okay, when this guy does this with his shoulder, when this guy does this with his hips,
Yeah.
he's going for a reverse. And so there's definitely going to be a learning curve for those of us who haven't gone to all these tournaments, figuring out what the tells are, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when I'm looking at video, I mean, obviously, everything's easier to tell from an outsider's perspective. Like, it's all the, Monday morning quarterbacking or whatever going like, oh, it's so
Mm-hmm.
obvious. Oh, it was such a tell. Oh, so this. And when you're in there, it's completely different. But it
Yeah.
really seems like just the mechanics of the serve are going to force your shoulder to do something very different
Mm-hmm.
than what you would be doing on a push or a cut. And so in my mind, like the hardest thing where like the game got a lot faster, especially in serve
Mm-hmm.
receive, was the fact that you had, before back when, we played in 2015 and serves were straight on, or if someone took a step off to the side, all you had to do was kind of like read where their body was going and then the ball went straight. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and then, people started doing like fakes and stuff like that. So then it was, don't bite, but the ball's still going to go straight. And then, once the cut came in, it was like, okay, I can't just look at what their shoulder's doing. I can't just look at where their body position is. Like now I have to react to the ball off the net. And so that
Mm-hmm.
the amount of time that you have to react to something like drops significantly. But in my mind, like if you get a shoulder read on something like that, like have more time to react than ever before, as long as you actually pick up on it.
Yeah. Um, I definitely agree. But I would say there are certain players who, I was just thinking while you were talking, Jackson Stanek, for example. I've had a few chances to play with him
Yeah.
over the course of the past couple of months. His reverse compared to his cut motion is almost identical, and
Yeah.
the amount of motion he gets on his regular cut and his reverse cut is ridiculous. And so by the time you can even think the tell of his reverse, is too late because you've already bitten on his regular step out for his cut. And so I think the key to advancing the reverse cut, for players that do have it, is disguising it, like filming yourself and disguising it into your normal serve. Because I
Right.
think that's something that Jackson Sinek does really well. And it's almost even more valuable if you get less motion off your reverse, if it looks more like your regular cut.
Oh,
Because that's something
100%.
Addison does as well. Like he doesn't get as much reverse motion as most players do on his verse cut, but his swing looks exactly the same. And so he's getting a lot of aces off of it just because it's disguised well.
Right. Well, I mean, I said the same thing even about cut serves and stuff like that. Like it's cool that people can serve virtually sideways. Like, you look at,
Mm-hmm.
you're like Jacob Payers and when they take some huge step out and then and then do it, that obviously is pushing you to like a very weak spot to receive from. But once he stepped out that far, like, you know, the trajectory of like where that ball is going versus like Kenny Ortega barely takes a step at all. And his
Mhm.
entire serve is basically like the amount of jump that he gets off of that. And so the mix up for him is, he's going to do, pushes, he's going to do slight cut, and he's going to do like a bigger cut. And that's what's going to like keep you guessing. So the amount of like discrepancy that you get between those things, I think is actually big. And so especially if you can disguise it, then like you don't need the ball to jump an extra 2 feet out to the side if you can just get somebody so confused that they don't take the step back to go get it in the first place. Like,
For sure.
then they don't touch it no matter what.
Definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
Um, do you think the reverse cut overall is good for the game or bad for the game?
Um, I'll reserve opinion for that until we actually see like, a pseudo like real season for this. I do think it's
Okay.
unfortunate that like the next groundbreaking thing that everyone's trying to do right now is again in serving. Again, I think that's
Hmm.
also just because like people obsess over serves and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. I'd like to have seen another advancement somewhere else where someone's got a better answer for setting or a better answer for defense or a better answer for even hitting at this point.
Hmm.
But so that I'd say like, okay, so that's not great. I don't think it's like a massive benefit, but I will say that like anything that's going to keep people from just securely getting solid touches every single time and going to force people into off net sets and then
Hmm.
having to recover hitting wise from that, I think is going to be good for defense overall. The real thing is just like what sucks is like the serving meta basically gets to advance a lot faster than serve receive meta
Hmm.
right now. Like serve receive meta has always been something that like can kind of keep up with it because tournaments run, and with tournaments not running as frequently, that's what I think
Hmm.
is tough. Like I'm sure Thomas is hitting just as many balls in his basement as he would if there was a tour going on. So he just has
Hmm.
fewer people seeing what he's working on. He's getting even better at it. Um, so that I think is unfortunate, but I don't think it's insurmountable.
Hmm.
Which I guess brings us back to a comment that happened on Facebook, which actually it was your comment on the podcast with Preston Buys
Hmm.
uh,
Grant.
and Grant about this idea that, well, why don't you share it first and then we'll kind of go from there. But I think you and I had some,
Yeah.
interesting thoughts where we like agreed, disagreed, and also felt like
Yeah.
we were like moving the conversation forward.
Yeah. So essentially, Grant said that he really regrets that his group of Texas pickup players grinded serves really hard from the very start because when they went and played pickup, they were either double faulting or they were acing each other. And so the cumulative effect of that is they don't have enough chances to work on their sets, work on their hits, work on defense. And because of that, they don't see the value. I mean, they see the value in sets and hitting, obviously, but they don't see the value in defense. And
Mm-hmm.
their skills aren't as polished in the other areas. And that was just a big eye opener for me because I never thought of the serving problem in terms of a developmental sense. But it totally makes sense because these players, although we know at the top level in the pro level, me and you both know, and a lot of people know that it takes way more than a serve to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
These new players that are just going to nationals and it's their first tournament, and they see Preston and Caleb ace anchored 14-0, they think that okay, if I just master a serve, that I can get to this pro level. And once they do that, they're essentially hamstringing their entire game because now their pickup group is going to be saturated with strong serves rather than how me and you learned growing up through the game of figuring out the metas together and figuring out touches and figuring out where we need to hit it. And then the last thing that came up for us was serving because serving wasn't strong in the beginning. And so
Right.
that was the last piece of the puzzle for us. Whereas now the first piece of the puzzle for a lot of players is serving. And I think it hamstrings the rest of their game.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's certainly true, and like it is unfortunate. And one thing that is unfortunate too is that like the flashy part of the game right now is these serves and stuff like that,
Hmm.
like like showing that deception on, being able to get that like crazy wide cut or doing some crazy fuego like, PJ does, and so people want to do the cool thing up front. Um, and so
Hmm.
they kind of grind that and then forget to just learn the fundamentals of the game. And then, like you said, like once you become really, really good at that, it actually prevents you from getting, reps at defense
Hmm.
and reps at touches. And but I think more than anything, what that does is point out like an even worse flaw in our community, and that's that like all we do to practice is play pickup.
Hmm.
In general, like I think that's just like it's where everybody kind of starts,
Yeah.
but especially if you want to start playing this competitively and like taking this a little bit more serious, like I think so far, like I think most of us top players have gotten away with just not having to do that. You know what I mean? We just
Hmm.
haven't really gotten to that point. But I think you're seeing these guys out of Texas realize like we just need to drill setting, like we just need to drill hitting, we just need to drill defense because
Yeah.
we're not getting enough natural reps at it. So like
Hmm.
there is an answer to it. And I think the other answer is just cultural. Like there are just tons of people in the community that talk about the importance of serving as like an answer to winning. And I think that
Hmm.
that's really really detrimental, especially because I think it more than anything, I think it disincentivizes the player that advances really quickly through advanced, because then
Hmm.
they hit Premier, like they win their way through a tournament, like just serving out of their gourd one day, and then they show up to Premier and they're like, oh shit, like everybody
Yeah.
else can do what I can do, except I don't know how to pass or set or do these things. Like I also think about like Michigan to an extent. Uh, like I remember every time we played Team Seven, like early in their Premier career, it was
Hmm.
literally like as long as you could serve receive them, you were fine. But we didn't even have to serve at them. Like at that, like in the early days, like they really couldn't just set the ball over the net like in system with like a free ball very well.
Hmm.
And so like Dylan and I were getting like easy defensive touches against them, and like we weren't a defensive team. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
and so I think they fell into that trap a little bit too, and like eventually caught up for sure. Um,
Yeah.
but I think it's really discouraging to a team like that to be like, oh, this is what we worked so hard for, and now we feel like we don't like feel athletic or understand how to keep
Hmm.
up. Like that's got to be tough, you know?
Yeah. And I definitely agree with that. And I also think you had a good point in your Facebook comment in reply to mine when you were talking about we kind of have an onus on ourselves as top players to preach that these other skills are important and you will not ultimately succeed if you don't have these skills. And I think
Right.
that's something you've been trying to do with your streams and your lessons over your streams, and Preston's been trying to do with HTR, and we've been trying to do with Trippy Fam. And I think that's very important for other top players to voice those opinions. But I also think it's important for our product, so to speak, so that the game that's at the highest level, I think it's important for our product to mirror those those sentiments, those things we're preaching of defense is really important, setting is really important. And I think we saw that at nationals finals. We saw that setting, serve receive, and hitting, clean hitting was really, really important. But I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of top tournaments and top level matches right now that is not indicative of what the important skill sets are. And I think sometimes serving is overly highlighted more than it needs to be.
Yeah.
And that's where the problem comes in for these new players who it's their first tournament. They don't know any of the top players. They just see that, oh, these guys are acing the other team. And they won the tournament. I saw them having a bunch of crazy serves and they ended up getting first or second. And so
Mm-hmm.
these players who aren't involved in the community yet, but they just go to one tournament and see these things happen, they go home, they tell their friends, oh, these guys had 6 serves. We need to practice our serves. And so they do that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where there might be a problem in terms of developmental wise. But I also agree with what you were saying. That bridge can be, or that gap can be bridged with drilling, with stuff like with what Hilltop's doing with their new app with drills.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think there's also certain things that there's no replacement for in-game experience. Like, I don't think you can truly drill defense in the same way that it's played out in an actual game.
No.
And there's something about in-game hitting that can't necessarily be drilled. Like, you can practice, yes, over the net, just technique informed hitting, but you can't practice reading a defense. You can't practice
Mm-hmm.
reacting to your partner's set and reading a defense. There's just certain things that we need to be able to do without the hindrance of serving overpowering our pickup games, to be able to practice, to lay the foundation for our game, to ultimately build up to where then you can add on serving and you can add on all these different types of things that enhance your game rather than them being the basis of your game, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you know what I find interesting too, and I think you bring it up, is like, okay, so people, you're talking about those players that find, a team that overperformed at a tournament and it was because of their serves.
Mm-hmm.
And so they go, well, I want to do that. So I'm going to go work on my serves. I do think that's certainly true. I think that, humans will always find the quickest way to get to where they want to go. And so the quickest way to get to where you want to go, if you want to get an upset over a top team, is to try and, just serve your way through them at one point. And at your own detriment,
Mm-hmm.
in the long term, because you're not working on all the other stuff that's going to make you, successful down the road. So that all makes sense to me. But one benefit that has is it takes, it increases variability in who can win or do well at a tournament beyond just like bracket draw or somebody like doing poorly. Like, now a team can come out of
Mm-hmm.
nowhere and do well, which is something that, like, especially in the early days of our sport, we just didn't see. Like, people were
Yeah.
so mad at, like, with like Chico, winning every tournament for years, and then
Mm-hmm.
CS winning every tournament pretty much for years. And they were saying like, oh, it's just getting boring. Like, there's no variability and you're not able to beat them. Well, now you have an answer to that where, like, we've increased that variability and now a team can come
Yeah.
out of nowhere. And I think quintessential example of that is what happened in Utah last year. Like, watching Three Crowns win that tournament was crazy. Nobody had them winning it.
Mm-hmm.
You might have thought like they're gonna have a good day. They'll probably get third. And
Yeah.
but they were on fire that day, and they took out everyone. Like, they played all the top teams in order to get
Mm-hmm.
into finals, and they beat them all because they were the hot hand that day. So it added that variability of like, oh, a team that's a top 20 team can now all of a sudden compete with a top 5 team.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, is like something that people asked for years, that ability for the team that's playing better to win and not just the one that had all the experience. Because the other end of
Mm-hmm.
this is like, you and I have been playing since basically the first nationals. And so the if the other answer is you just have to play the sport for 7 years in order to get as good as we are, that's a tough answer too. Like, I think there's
Yeah.
a balance of all those things that you have to achieve, and I think that sometimes the serve might be that answer to some people, but it just doesn't lead to
Mm-hmm.
like the same long-term success. Like, you look
Yeah.
at, I mean, Stanek, I mean, he obliterated me in Utah that tournament too. I was just like, what on earth? But you look at Stanek's career versus like a Tyler Chiswick. Like, Stanek
Mm-hmm.
has a crazier serve. There's no doubt. But
Yeah.
at least there's something underlying it fundamentally that is like the other parts of the game are important enough that, like, over in the long run, it's better to have the fundamental toolkit there. So I think there's
For
some,
sure.
yes. So I think there's a little bit more of a balancing effort than like some people reduce it down to be. And especially when like there is like a high profile tournament and it's won by a high profile server.
Mm-hmm.
And it fits a narrative we already have.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I think the big question we got to ask ourselves is, what do we want the highlighted skill set to be in our game? And I
Mm-hmm.
think right now the highlighted skill set is serving. And one example that I think a lot of people get wrong is like Caleb Peck. A lot of people who are just outsiders looking in think he's only a great server. Caleb Peck is
No.
an incredible all around player.
Mm-hmm.
And for me personally, I would love to see him have more opportunities to show those other facets of his game rather than just being able to dominate with a serve, which he does now, because I know he can dominate with those other areas of his game as well, which I think are more dynamic and more entertaining overall rather than just that shock factor of the serve in us. And so I think we as a community need to identify what we want the highlighted skill set to be in our sport,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to work to make our sport highlight those skill sets. And so I think that's something I would see like to change, just in terms of what we're highlighting. I think right now serving is over highlighted in comparison to of the importance I think it should have.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would like to see Preston and Caleb show those other incredible facets of their game rather than serving, which is they can just so easily win tournaments off of serving when they're both incredible all around players, and we don't really get to see that as much.
Yeah. I mean, again, I do think there are counter examples to that where like we did see that in the finals at nationals. And I think at some point we have to look at what our sport looks at its best and not just
Mm-hmm.
because I mean there are top teams that get wrecked 21-14, 21-15 in in games, and they're, three spots apart on the PR because like they're just playing poorly and they're serve receiving poorly. And if you're serve receiving poorly, you're gonna lose 100% of the
Yeah.
time because serving is so good. But like our sport looks really good when when both teams are serving well, both teams are serve receiving well, and then it's those like little differences that make sense too. And so that I think is also part of it. But I guess in in your mind, what are the things that you would want to highlight, and how do you think you go about that?
Um, so I don't have like a secret answer or anything or like a secret solution, but I just think that serving and serve return is a static, so to speak, a static aspect of our game. Whereas hitting, defense, and setting are dynamic. They're multifaceted. There's a bunch of different things all happening at once, which I think is overall more entertaining rather than just watching an incredible cut serve and a
Mm-hmm.
guy struggle to return it, or just other examples of that. And so I don't have an answer to this is how we fix it, but I think if we come together as a community and realize that this is a long-term problem, because it's not about what we like to watch. The ultimate success of our sport is going to depend on what the average Joe likes to watch. And the average Joe doesn't like to watch serving. The average Joe likes to watch the rallies, the incredible diving sets, the incredible hits. Those are the things that I think um, I've seen and heard that the average person likes to see rather than just a powerful serve, and the determining factor being can you return it or can you not return it, I
Yeah.
guess.
Quick question: Have you read the document that Carter Clem is shopping around? Because it sounds like you have.
Yes,
Okay,
yes, I have.
we'll leave it at that because he wants to, debut that. But you were using some language in there, and I was like, I feel like he's read this,
Yeah.
which I agree on that on. And my only feedback to that is that like if we only want to highlight the more dynamic parts of our game, and we want to do that immediately, what you wind up doing is creating tons of rules and regulations to the
Yeah.
sport in order to do that. And without and the sooner you do that to solve a problem now, like you're not letting a meta naturally develop. Like Skylar was uh, said something to me about a year ago where he was just like, yeah, in 2015, if someone had the cut serve, like we see it today, like would we have
Mhm.
called that a pocket at the time, and the whole sport just looks completely different because like the way that we evolved then made it so that like our definition of a pocket had gotten to a point where like that's not a pocket anymore.
Yeah.
But if we had just intervened too early, like would the cut serve just be illegal and we'd have some really boring, uh, thing where like you can only serve straight. Um,
Hmm.
and then does that create a whole list of other problems where now one, two, three putaways are too easy. So now we have to like come up with something where like you can only get kills if you hit it like over, 6 feet in the air so that there's time to get the ball under it. And so my fear with creating these rules is like as soon as you do it too early, you only can solve the problem by then creating like more and more and more rules.
Hmm.
And it becomes tough. And I think the other counterpoint that I have to that is in every sport, the first time you watch a sport, you have no idea how it works, and you're educated by the announcers and the players and their strategies, what
Hmm.
is important and what is cool and what is exciting. The fact that the fact that in football you got to get 2 feet in bounds and as you're going out of bounds in order for the catch to count. That's not
Yeah.
inherently exciting, but when you set it up with all the other rules around it, it becomes exciting, and you're
Hmm.
told that, and then those plays are pointed out and they're reacted to, and so then you mimic that back. And so I think that's one thing too. I think sometimes we apologize too much for what our sport is, and just because it is possible to just completely wreck somebody with serves, it's like, yeah, no, you can wreck somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, but that's what's cool is once you know what's doing, there's so much that goes into that first contact, and then people get through that. Um,
Yeah.
so I think there's an element of that too that I don't think gets highlighted enough because everyone's quick to point out problems and not
Yeah. I
and not
think,
the rest.
yeah, I want to say me and you have had this conversation somewhere else. And I think it boiled down to us just having like, a different perspective and a different opinion, which is totally okay. We're allowed to have our own opinions.
Yeah.
Um, but I think thinking back to those conversations, my counterpoint to your counterpoint of letting the meta develop is that kind of assumes that if you're saying, well, let's just let defense develop, let's just let serve return develop, which I think is short term a good thing. That kind of assumes that serving and hitting is going to stop developing and is going to let the defense catch up. I think this is where me and you just like disagree, and so we have different viewpoints on it,
Mm-hmm.
which is totally okay. But I think if you ask a lot of players who have been in the game since 2014 on, if you ask them what was your favorite years of playing, they'll say 2014 and 2015 because those are the years where aces really didn't happen a lot and serving really wasn't how you got breaks. And so
Mm-hmm.
um, there were a lot more played out points, even though some of them were boring, some of them were one, two, threes. There were a lot more opportunities for defense and dynamic interaction. And so I think having limitations and creating limitations to make things harder on you are good because it makes you be more creative to figure out how to operate under these limitations in order to win. And so I think adding limitations, while it inherently sounds negative, can sometimes be a good thing. Like
Right.
basketball, in the beginning of basketball, they were just running with the ball and putting it in a basket, and that was too easy and that was too hard for the defense. So they added the limitation of, okay, you have to dribble to move. You can pass the ball, but you can't just run around with the ball. You have to dribble.
Right.
And so I think there are some cases where we see adding limitations and adding rules is really, really beneficial. And then, but I also see your point of view where if we're just adding rules and rules and rules, it's just going to get to a point where you can't keep up with the rule set of the game. And there's no point in watching because there's too many rules to abide by. There's too many things you have to know and have to remember to even operate. And so I definitely see both perspectives, but I was just remembering, I think me and you have had this conversation before somewhere else, and we just ultimately came to the conclusion that like we just have different viewpoints.
Yeah.
Neither of us are necessarily wrong or right. We just have different viewpoints.
Yeah. Well, and I think more than anything, I'm not opposed to new rules. I think the main thing is that my fear is putting in rules that are just overly restrictive on what you can do. Um,
Agreed.
and so, when we make like some of the more recent rule changes, they've been small, but big and effective and do exactly what
Hmm.
you want. Like that sloppy first touch rule, like allowing a double contact with one motion only stands to like give us more rallies. And there's other
Great
sports
rule.
precedent where like that now that now is like a small change, doesn't majorly impact the game, but does change a lot. And so my fear
Hmm.
with, if you go like, all right, we have to nerf serving, like that was a tiny buff to defense that like just overall
Hmm.
helped, but didn't change how we played the sport that drastically. Versus like if you start going like, all right, we need to nerf serving, like now you can only serve this wide, or you can only or now like you can only put top spin on the ball or something like that. Like I think that just overly restricts what you're able to do with it. And then I think when you overly restrict things, it just begets other problems in response to it because you've now nerfed something to oblivion. Or on the other
Yeah.
hand, you get like if you overly buff something, you're like, okay, defense is too hard. So like for competitive play, we're going to allow one bounce. Like now
Hmm.
points just don't end, and now
Yeah.
and now it's too easy. Or you go like now teams get four contacts. Like all right, that's just like it's like overly too much in response. And so I think when people are looking at rules, like I mean, you're OG enough that you remember everyone saying we have to add boundaries. Like we have to have a 25
Yeah.
foot boundary. Otherwise, this game's gonna go nowhere. Defense is impossible. And like that was in 2016, and like you know, defense was very possible then. Like if we all inserted
Hmm.
ourselves into 2016 spike ball, we would be getting digs more than 50% of the time. You know what I mean? We just also got
Yeah.
better at the other ends of it. Like the meta developed alongside
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But as soon as you start going like that is just flat out like a very restrictive rule, and so it cheapens the amount of creativity that you can put into it. It makes every player start playing like every other player.
Hmm.
And then I mean boundaries just have 99 other problems with them. See any Facebook thread with me in the day uh, advocating against that. I was so mad every
Yeah.
time someone brought up boundaries. But but that's where like I'm interested in hearing solutions for these things,
Yeah.
and I'm down to get a rebalance where serving is a little bit less effective than it currently is now. But so far, every
Yeah.
answer that I hear to this is just overly restrictive to the point where like now we're just going to see boring 1, 2, 3 putaways and every player playing like every other
Hmm.
player, and that I don't
Yeah.
like. Like I mean, these cut serves, like how many like you can identify cut serves in like a shadow of the form of somebody doing it. You could be like, that's
Hmm.
Thomas doing that. That's Preston doing it. That's PJ
Yeah.
doing it. And that's what I think is cool. Like it's expressive. But if you start going like serve has to go straight, like everyone's gonna do the same thing.
Hmm.
And that I don't think is like good for the sport.
Yeah. I agree with that. I definitely don't want to come across as I think as saying that serving shouldn't play a component in the game because I definitely think it should.
Oh, I'm definitely not.
Um,
I'm definitely not taking you at that. It's more
yeah,
just for everybody here. I think there's just a balance to be achieved with all these things. Like I think just going like laissez-faire capitalism of like everyone will just figure it out. There will be winners and
yeah,
losers. Like okay, that's not good either. Like we got to have some boundaries. So
yeah,
same with that. We got to have some rules in this sport, and we got to have some
yeah,
limitations on what you can and can't do. Um,
yeah,
but how much and how fast do we change those things in order to say like, well, we tried and it didn't happen. Like
yeah.
if I guess like what do you want that role to look like for most teams? Like if a top team right now is getting like well, I guess in your mind like and I don't know if there's stats out there that bore out. I know Max was trying to compile everything from Pro Division last year and do like
Hmm.
stats on it. But like what do you think that like in Pro Division, what percentage of breaks do you think are off of outright aces?
Percentage of breaks. So I would probably say if we're factoring in. So are you wanting me to factor in hitting mistakes, or do you want me to factor in only things that the other team is causing to be a break? So like only defensive touches and only aces, or do you want me to factor in mistakes as break percentage as well?
Either or is fine.
Okay,
I guess I'm more interested in the ratio of defense to
yeah, defense to serving.
right defense to serving. But then there's those gray areas too, where like you have a really good serve, it causes a bad first touch, and then it causes a really long set, and then a difficult hit for a hitter. And if they had put it on,
Yeah,
it would be defense, but instead it's like an error. So
yeah.
then would you call that a serve or not? You know?
I'm gonna call a bad serve return touch a break caused by serves rather than a break caused by defense.
Right.
So with that being the case, I would say pro division. Obviously, it depends on the team, but I think overall, I would say 85 to 90% of the breaks are serving, and 10 to 15% of the breaks are defense. Would you agree with that? Would you change that in any way?
No, I definitely don't agree. I think that there are
Okay.
teams that do that. Like, I think those stats might be true for, boisterous. Um,
Yeah.
like, I definitely think there are teams that do that. But I mean, Skylar and I are going to throw that completely the other way. Like, I'd say that our breaks that day at Nationals were almost the inverse. Um,
So you got
generously, I go
85% of your breaks on defense?
generously, I would go like 70-30 defense,
Wow.
like
Hmm.
probably. Or, errors on the other team, I guess, are like tough. Like if I do like a not that difficult serve that somebody misses, like then what do I call that? Like an unforced error, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so that's different too. Like when someone hits a spectacular serve and then the team struggles to get it back to the net, like probably the serve. But if it like
Hmm.
wasn't a spectacular serve and then they struggle to get it back to the net, like it's kind of on them, which is tough.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to do with that. But no, I
I guess
think
I was just thinking, like, my own experience, like, I think it would be safe to consider Clark and I as a good defensive team.
yeah,
And I definitely don't even see it close to 50-50. I think we still get a lot more breaks off of serve rather than defense when I would consider us a defensive team rather than a serving team.
right.
So
But then you look at like
that's really interesting.
right, but then you look at like anchored. Like I mean, don't you think they're probably sitting at like a 70-32, like
Yeah, but I
70
think they're an
defense?
outlier. I'm talking about a whole over the whole overall.
Right.
Like if I had to sum up all 16 pro division teams into here's your percentage of what they get off of aces versus defensive breaks. That
Yeah.
was kind of my thinking.
See,
But
yeah, see, I just want to see real stats on this because I think that I I think most people agree with you. I
mhm,
don't think that it's true, and especially just like like having taken stats on like matches that I've watched. I'll take stats for me, I'll take stats for the other team, and I just don't really
yeah,
see that happening as much, like in terms of breaks, like percentage of breaks that you're getting off of offense versus
yeah.
defense. But then it's also tough too to just then not count errors, and then how do
Yeah,
you
that's what I was thinking. Like if we're
like
factoring in
unforced
roll
versus
ups,
right,
like roll ups and bad hits as defensive touches, I could definitely see my percentages coming closer together.
right.
But I wasn't really counting those as defensive touches in my estimation. I was just counting those as errors, not really breaks caused by the other team, I guess.
Right. Well, w- what I think would be unfair would be saying that like it only counts as a defensive break if you're getting defensive touches while the other team is in system. Because I think that
Hmm.
that's the point of a challenging serve and why I'm afraid to nerf serves at this point too is that if you don't have a challenging serve that forces a team out of system in the first place, defense becomes very very difficult.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, it might have been set up by that, but ultimately, like, the team's kind of in system. They're not like perfectly over the net or anything. And then you're finally able to play some defense. But
Hmm.
then I guess is that set off by the serve or is that your credit on defense? I
Yeah, it just
I
all
don't know.
comes together. It's so hard to separate in
Right.
those different areas.
Yeah. So maybe that's where the divide is, in the community too. I guess what what rule changes would you like to see if you could see anything right now? Like you don't have to go through board approval or community approval. You get to just throw in a rule
Yeah.
right now. What would you like to see?
See, that's the problem. I don't have an answer, which is unfortunate.
Right.
But I think I think the fundamental problem right now is with hitting. So I think I would like to see serve slightly nerfed, not incredibly nerfed, just very slightly.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to see something that not heavily but not lightly um, affects hitting and affects the ease of ability to hit. So just for example, this would never work in an actual tournament format. Um, but Clark and I had this thing called Trippy rules where um, we play under a gentleman's rule set where if the set that you're hitting is inside of the net, you have to hit it at the defense where they can touch it. Once again, this would never work in a tournament competitive setting. Um, and then the other rule is if the set that you're hitting is outside of the cylinder of the net, that you can hit the ball wherever and try to score however. And when we play those rules, the rallies and just the plays are incredible and so many different skills are highlighted. And so obviously that would never work in the competitive realm. But
Mm-hmm.
I think if we get more creative with how we put limitations on hitting and we start experimenting with more creative limitations, that can go a long way. So figuring out, so when we play those rules, we all agree that this is the product that needs to be brought to the forefront. This is round net how we think it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do we creatively enforce limitations and rules to make this the norm? And so I don't have a magic rule that I think will work, but I think we all get into this mindset of going back to anything that's been suggested and just trying to figure out how that can work rather than finding new and creative ways to put limitations on hitting and offense that we haven't even explored yet, and just doing stupid things like trippy rules where yes it's stupid and yes it can never work in competitive scene, but when you're experimenting with these things, you're figuring out all these different possible limitations that could be put on the game that could positively affect it. And so I think yeah, just something, I guess to sum it up, I think serving needs to be nerfed slightly, not anything heavy, and then we need to think of a creative way to um, give a nice little nerf to hitting. I think is the right balance.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point there, and like something that comes to mind for me as a volleyball player is like like you said that you can, just go all out if the set is like outside the cylinder.
Mm-hmm.
Like in volleyball, you have to like yeah, in volleyball you can only contact the ball offensively when it's on
Mm-hmm.
your side of the net, or at least some part of the ball is
Hmm.
over the net. So you can't set the ball 3 feet over and then have some guy that has like a 45-inch vertical go and like hit it down over
Okay.
people. Once that ball is like on their side, he can then go up and like block, but the other team would have to touch it first.
Okay. I
and
got you.
and so it doesn't work as well because obviously a net is straight up and down. It's a
Mm-hmm.
plane versus this cylinder is pretty thick, and then not to mention the fact that now you got to figure out how to enforce that. But it
Yeah.
but if we got to a point where all of the sets had to be outside the cylinder of the net, now now the defense knows which side of the net to at least go play defense on. Like now you only
Mm-hmm.
have like 180 degrees of the net to defend, and defense becomes
Yeah.
a lot more possible. And I think that's what people complain about with this. They're like, imagine volleyball, but you can hit the ball backwards, and it's like, well, that's not quite the same
Yeah.
thing. But now you can incorporate all 360 degrees, but then the ball has to be outside the net. So you could set up on this side of the net or that side of the net, or you could jump over the net, but you can't contact it while it's like
Mm-hmm.
over the net. But then now you're just getting into like we can't even observe and make sure that the ball isn't tossed inside
Yeah.
the 6 foot line, let alone now we got to figure out how to do that over the set. So I don't know how you
Yeah.
accomplish that. Like in volleyball, it's one plane and you put a referee at the top of that and he can stare at it.
Yeah.
and make a
I
a
guess
good enough call. But
yeah. I guess my main point is like I think we all get caught up in thinking that it needs to be a completely new facet that needs to be added in the game in order to make it better. So like we think it needs to be a 25-foot line where you can't hit outside. We think we need to introduce a whole nother bounce as a solution
right,
where I think we can just there are ways that we can creatively put limitations on our current rule set and current game that I think could be really beneficial rather than having to add in these whole new elements of the game and change the entire meta of the game. We can just put limitations and rules that limit the current meta so it's not an entirely new game. We're just enforcing it in a different way. I think there's a lot of opportunities there that are unexplored.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think I agree with that fundamentally too. Like I think finding these little rules to impact the game, I think they add up over time, and I think that means a lot too. And not just creating another line to have another line, or creating
Agreed.
another plane to have another plane. Um, I I think those can be solutions, but I think oftentimes they're overlooked. And then more than anything, like I think that I think when people so blatantly just point out problems without coming up with like any sort of solution. I think
Hmm.
that like I think it's just like degenerative in general. Like I think and we see this like devolve in the Facebook threads all the time where people are just like something has to change or I'm quitting and it's like okay, like well that well that didn't help anybody here. Like what's your suggestion? Like and if you can't think of an answer, like I mean, there's a lot of people trying to think of things to like make things a little bit better. Like,
Yeah.
especially with these flick shots right now, like people are hitting the ball so low that like it's a good thing that we put the rule in that like the ball can't
Hmm.
simultaneously, be on the net and your hand because you know, that at least just makes the flick shot have to happen a little bit higher than if you could like let the
Yeah.
thing depress into the net and then you just kind of push it some way. Like that'd be horrible. So,
Yeah.
like those things are at least just preventing things from getting like out of control. Now, I think we're both looking for a solution that is slightly more
Mhm.
restrictive than that. But, I think people lose the forest for the trees there where they're trying to solve one problem and they don't realize the other problems that then creates.
Agreed. I think we're on the same page there for sure.
Yeah. Which speaking of, rule changes and advocating for things, you're officially on the Spikeball Round Net Association Player Union. Is that
Yes.
is SRAPU? Is that what we're going with these days?
So we actually had a conversation about that today. I think we're going to stick with SRPU.
SRPU. All right, SERPU,
Yeah.
if you will.
SRPU.
Yeah. So I'm on the what advisory board or whatever, but you're on like the board
Yeah, whatever you
board.
want to call
Right, but you're on like the
it.
board. So basically the way it's set up there's 30 people that are talking about, the changes to make and then everything is ultimately voted on by 5 people and they're the ones that are kind of creating the um the outline, the platform of
Mhm.
everything here and the other 30 of us are, advising on that and giving our input and but ultimately,
Mhm.
you try to have 30 people vote on something. It's too much, but you don't want not enough people involved either. So you're officially one of these people that's voting for all the things there.
Yes.
Uh, how's that
Yes.
been? How's that been? Like obviously you guys
Yeah.
just had a call today, which is cool.
Yeah, we had our very first call with the board and the president, Dylan Fogarty, today,
Hmm.
and it went really really well. I think I think just from that call, it proved that voting Dylan as president was a very very good decision because he's super goal oriented and a super good listener, which I think are two great qualities for a president, which he definitely showed in that first call.
It's good to hear.
And he's also great at delegating tasks to who he thinks can accomplish them in the best way. Um, and so we talked about a lot of things that we want to do immediately, which I don't want to share yet. I want to give time for
Yeah.
us to work on those things before we share them. But there are a lot of exciting things that I think we can have an effect on within this year, and then there are also a lot of things that we set goals for 2021 that I think we can have an exciting effect on. And the ultimate goal of it all is we're not trying to be divisive in any means. We're trying to be partners um, with Spike Ball and partners with the players and bring us all together to push for positive change in our sport. And I think
Right.
that's a very important point to make, because I think a lot of people, when they see union, and they're like, oh, we're dividing, we're opposing forces, which I think in this case is not the case at all. It's just we're trying to unify the voices of our players rather than just us all barraging the Facebook comment threads with our differing opinions. We're trying to unify our voices and unify our thoughts and ideas so that we can say, hey, 40, 50 players feel this certain way about a specific issue, which I think carries a lot more weight than just me commenting in the Facebook group and then a bunch of people liking a comment. So I think that's the goal of the union overall. It's just provide a unifying voice for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and again, just being organized about it. Like when you have a zillion Facebook threads, it's hard for anyone to keep up with it. And as someone who's on the Spikeball board, for competitive play, like having all of those voices in the Facebook group is great, but it also is something like I have to turn on notifications for every time there's a new post because like I need to make sure that I've read all of these things versus
Mm-hmm.
like if you guys put in a lot of groundwork and you put out a document that's like here's everything, like that becomes a lot more productive for
Mm-hmm.
something on the other end and for change to actually happen instead of just having these fragmented conversations that often turn angry for no reason on Facebook. So you kind of take the social media element of it out of it too. What's like the scope of this? Obviously, a lot of us are top players or at least top players in the community, but what kind of changes are you looking to affect outside of top play as well?
Yeah, so I think a point Dylan was making in our first call is if we can make positive change at the highest level, in the premier level, and the pro level, that has a trickle down effect through all divisions, through all tournaments, because ultimately our sport is going to mirror the top level of the game, and it's going to follow that route that we set out as kind of an example of here's where the sport is, here's where it needs to be at the pro level, and then it's going to have a trickle down effect on all divisions, and even independent tournaments are going to kind of follow suit. And so I think that just providing that example and creating change. So I think I was talking earlier about something I'm really passionate about is the product that we put forth in terms of the game and what it looks like at the top level.
Hmm.
And so there's small things we can do that I think we can put forth more effort, like creating a better center court atmosphere at tournaments, incentivizing
Yes.
fans to stay longer. I think there's
Yes.
some unexplored avenues there. That's just one small facet that I think we can affect change in, but there's so many different ways that I think we can partner with the company and with players to unify our ideas and synthesize them in an effective way that we can accelerate the growth of our sport rather than just the kind of snail's pace we're at right now, I guess.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, we're fortunate enough that we are,
I think my mic
seeing.
died, Chris. I'm sorry.
Uh, oh, your mic's good. You're.
Let me change my input really quick,
Oh no, I can still hear you.
or my output. I can hear you barely, so it should work.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that's important to not just solely focus on top, but understand that like there is like a role model aspect to be had there too. Um, so that's interesting. And one thing that like personally I want to see balanced is because this is by top players and somewhat for top players. These events that Spikeball runs are community driven, and
Mm-hmm.
while they're also the professional answer for us, that's like a side objective for what they're running in general. Like most people come to play to get introduced to the community, have fun, and then hopefully what we need to be working on is getting them to stick around and watch longer and become a little bit better of fans. um,
Mm-hmm.
but one thing that I've always wanted to focus on is just like not losing one for the other because
Yeah.
spike ball can only invest in so much here, and so you want tournaments to
For sure.
grow. They got to cater to not just the top player, but at the same time, that experience has to be good, and there has to be a product that comes out of this that's of a certain quality.
For sure.
So I think there's such a balancing effort there, that I don't think people realize. I think people are like, if we just change the rules of the sport, then everyone will watch it. And it's like, well, no,
Yeah.
like, part of that is like, what's available to watch on social media right now? What's the reach of that? Is that geared towards something that you're going to watch and think is really cool for 1 second? Or is that something that's going to invite you into the community and get you watching a
Mhm.
lot of film and then getting you to do, spike school on the app and then show up to a tournament and then, you know, become a spectator at some point? Like,
Yes.
is there that feeder program there to be able to do that? And I think that's what we're missing more than anything.
I definitely agree with that. And yeah, what I said is just one facet of what I think the union can affect. It's definitely not the scope of the union or all it's trying to accomplish. Um, but yeah, I think there's a lot of good things down the pipeline that some are going to come really soon, I think. And then I also think we have a lot of good plans for next year and trying to affect positive change that I'm really excited to see come to fruition because we've got really good men and women working on them. We also got uh, great men and women giving ideas in the union and just giving their opinions. And I think it's really a productive atmosphere that we haven't had yet.
Right.
And so I'm excited to see how it affects the rate of change towards where we want the sport to ultimately be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think productivity has been huge just in how we have the conversation and also like the amount of conversation that we've had. I feel like we've
Mm-hmm.
really done a lot more in that regard. I'm excited to see what, all the stuff that you guys have taken from these past weeks, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of where you're going with it. And then just for clarity, because I think a lot of people want to know, who are the official 5 voting members?
Yeah. So Dylan Fogarty is the president. He is not a voting member. But the 5 board members who are voting members are myself, Jordy Vigna, Taylor Sanford, Preston Byes, and Ryan Fitzgerald.
And pick, if you could find 5 better people, I would be shocked. No, I think that was key. Was doing that. I'm really glad to see the women's game represented on there because
Mm-hmm.
we can't lose that, inside of
Absolutely.
this. Did you guys talk at all about solutions for women? Because I mean it's been an initiative at Spikeball too. Like, I can't tell you how many times we brainstorm things on the board to just get the women's game numbers up more than
Mm-hmm.
anything. We just can't seem
Yeah,
to get people to be recurring.
we definitely did talk about that, and that's something we definitely want to address, and something we think Jordy can have a really positive effect on. And we don't have all the solutions yet. That's something we've kind of so in this first call we kind of talked about what are our immediate goals we want to accomplish, what are our long-term goals we want to accomplish, and who of the board members are the best people qualified to affect change in these different areas and to
Hmm.
take these on themselves and take ownership of these issues and run with them and try to solve these problems. And so we kind of obviously we think Jordy can have the biggest effect on women's round net and knows the most about women's round net, knows its problems, knows its faults, and also knows its successes. So or its successes. So um, Jordy is, I think, going to do some really great things with women's round net, and um, obviously, overall, we all will come together to help her with her goals that she comes forth with, and with her problems and issues that she sees and needs help with. But I think we've got the perfect person to address that problem in her. And I
Yeah.
think she'll do a great job with it.
Yeah. No, I'm excited to see everything that comes out of it. I'm excited to, you know, just be a part of solving all those solutions as well. And then I'm excited on the other end. I'm excited that like the final product that comes out of this from you guys is something that like I will surely be reviewing on the spike ball
Mm-hmm.
board. And I think that's cool. Like, and I think more than anything, I think that shows the fact that like this isn't adversarial. I think we're all just
Yeah.
looking for solutions. And more than anything, like I think what we're trying to do is take that adversary, like any sort of adversarial element out of it, and just make sure that we're all working towards exactly the same things and not
Yeah.
stepping on each other's feet or, you know, coming up with a solution ourselves that we think is what success looks like, and then Spikeball comes up with its own that, that's what they think success looks like, and then we're at odds. It's like, all right, no,
Yeah.
let's define what success looks like. What roles are you playing here? What roles are we playing as players? What do we have to give you in order for you to turn that into something? And then what are you going to be able to provide to us to like make that possible to you too?
Mhm.
And so I think I'm excited to see where this goes for sure, because
Yeah.
I've been
I think
dreaming
it's
of this
important.
for years.
Yeah. And can you still hear me? It says, looked like I'm having some problems, but can you still hear me?
Oh yeah, no, you're good.
Okay, good. That's one important point I want to make, that even though there is a board of 6 people that are taking these issues to heart and kind of owning them, it's definitely not only up to us to affect change. I think it's just our job to kind of rally the troops, I guess. And we definitely need help from players across the board if we want to see ultimate change in our sport. It's not just up to us 6 people to do these things. It's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us being organized, being willing to listen to others and not be so stubborn about our own opinions that we're just writing off others' opinions. And so I think it's definitely going to be a team effort. And just I wanted to make that clear that it's not just us 6 that are over this. It's everyone. It's all top players coming together at all levels, from all different experiences. And so um, I'm excited to see what immediate returns we get on the work we're putting in right now, and then also the long term goals that I think we can all work together to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean for sure. And the other thing too is like I just personally want to invite everyone into coming up with solutions as well. Like,
Mm.
I'm not on the board of 5 that votes, and I'm not the president. And I'm fortunate enough to be in this group at 30, but we're all listening to everything that's said on Facebook, and more than anything, like we we know what the problems are. We don't need help with that anymore. We don't need people to point out what is wrong or what needs to be looked at. What we're interested in right now are like solutions. And so, I want to invite everyone to be a part of that process and to, we all know that we're all walking around just daydreaming about what we want this sport to be constantly. And we want to know what your daydreams look like too. And so, but we want to hear solutions and well thought out ones that have pros and cons associated with them, and trade-offs that are somewhat analyzed and thought through, and not just something that immediately solves one little thing that you know don't have. So just in general, like everyone here is listening. Like I think that's
For sure.
I can say as someone who's in this, that like everyone on that everyone of the 5 board members and Dylan has been listening throughout this whole process, and I know they're listening beyond that as well. So make your voices heard. Always feel free to reach out to us. Like we're not that hard to get in touch with. We're not like celebrities or anything. Like our
Yeah.
Instagrams, our Facebooks. Just reach out and have like a dope conversation.
Yeah, and that's also another thing. One of our short-term goals is to establish connections with players overall, and so ways we're going to accomplish that is through social media and establishing touch points in the Facebook group. And so through those avenues, it allows every single player, every person to voice their opinion directly to the union at large. And so I think once that gets accomplished, that's going to allow um, it's going to be a lot more effective for funneling great ideas and funneling great solutions and identifying problems. And so once that's like I said, one of our short-term goals. So once that gets set in place, I think we'll definitely be able to establish kind of a conversation more than us just saying, here's what's happening. It'll be more of a back and forth of
Right.
conversation, what we're working on and things. So
Yeah. No, I'm super excited to see that all pan out. Excited to be a part of it. It's just a cool time to do everything.
for sure.
Well, one thing I want to shout out, and also I got couple of questions for you. I
Yeah.
definitely want to shout out your whole Trippy fam thing.
Yeah.
I think that's super cool, and I think it's a like unique way that you guys have decided to fundraise your your goals and your dreams.
Yeah.
What kind of led you towards that? What all comes with it? I don't know. Sell people right now.
Yeah. So Clark and I were just exploring ways that we could kind of pass on our knowledge of the game and the sport and creative ways to do that. And so we kind of settled on Trippy Fam. And so I think the biggest two pieces of Trippy Fam is that we make monthly skill tutorial videos, teaching how you do different skills, how we do different skills, and drills we do to refine those skills. And then also every month we make game breakdown videos that are breaking down our game film and our game strategy and kind of explaining what our mindset is going into a match, adjustments we make during a match, and things like that. And so those to me are the two biggest pieces of Trippy Fan. But there's also other things like a private Facebook group where anybody who is a part can post, and we're all in there together. So it's every Trippy Fan member, and it's also me and Clark in there, where we all post and ask questions about certain things we want to get better at. And so we're all helping each other in there get better at different skills. And then there's also smaller pieces like you're just part of like our close friends group on Instagram where we post some private content. And then we were going to do podcasts when we were traveling around to different tournaments with top players, but obviously that didn't happen. And
Right.
so we haven't had that podcast piece yet. But yeah, I think the biggest pieces are the skill tutorials and the game breakdown videos. I think those are super valuable and something that Clark and I put a lot of thought into, and hopefully will advance the different levels of players who have chose to be a part of Trippy Fam.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one, I think it's really smart to, do that. I think that's, your guys' way of kind of giving back and, raising the next generation of people here. And you've made it like incredibly affordable.
Yeah, that was the
like,
main goal.
yeah. What's the pricing on it again? It's like,
$30, and that gets you the whole year. So
right.
you get all the content we made up until this point, and that gets you all the content that we will make up until 2021. So
Yeah. So literally like $30 for wisdom from, wait, did you guys enter the season ranked third?
yeah,
Yeah, from the third best team in the country, like $30, like Jesus, like you're basically giving it
essentially
away
like
for free.
$4 a month. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. So that's I mean, I like one, I just think it's cool too. Just finding these unique ways to try and like make, some money to be able to just not lose money doing what you're doing right now is super important. And I know it's a problem that we're also working on, within the players union as well, and trying to find solutions to that.
mm-hmm.
But I think, some of it does come down to what us players are going to be doing individually as well. And so just want to commend you on your guys' solution to that. I think it's cool.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Well, I think this was great. Oh, wait, no, I wanted to tell you a weird fun fact that I don't even know.
Oh, let's hear it.
I don't think I've shared this with anybody recently,
Okay.
if not ever. I don't even know if you know. Did you know that in 2014 Central Regionals, we played each other?
I think you've told me this before, but when
Did
you
I?
told me, I had absolutely no idea. Like
Yeah.
I only remember playing and losing to Dylan, and I had no idea that I played you.
Yeah. I think we played in pools. I think we played to like 15, and I think we lost like 15-11 or something like that. But it was but we were horrible, and you guys had matching jerseys, so we were terrified of you. And was that you and Tucker, or was that you and Clark?
That was me and Tucker. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you were also, one of the only people that had a three-person team going as well.
Yeah.
We were doing that with Unleashed the next year, where I was kind of the root of that, and it was, mostly me and Zagone. But back then, you could play under a different team name and earn points. So every once in a while, Dylan and I would just become Origin Unleashed and get points, and that was a point of contention, and we
Yeah.
rightfully got rid of that. That was not smart, but I just thought that was a fun little fact for all of you that made it to the end of this podcast.
Yeah, that's so funny.
You've definitely earned it. All right. Anything else that you want to plug, promote, say? Any last words?
I think I've plugged everything I want to plug. I want to give a quick shout out to you. I think the content
Oh,
you've been putting out lately is awesome.
thanks.
I always enjoy your streams. Always I've listened to all the podcasts so far, and I've really enjoyed them. And I think you do a lot of great things for the community that don't get noticed that much. So I appreciate you and all that you do for the game, and I think a lot of people do as well. And so thank you for all that you do for the game.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. It always feels good to be recognized. So, I appreciate that. No, this has been fun. I think this is slowly going to become like my favorite thing that I've done. Like, like the first thing was just starting the Twitch channel, but now I think I've got like a good use for it right now. And I want to find some other stuff to be doing with it as well, beyond these podcasts. But I think this is where it needs to be going. So I'm excited, and thanks for being an early part of this before you knew what it even was. You agreed to do it. So
yeah, thanks for having me. I had a blast. Always love talking with you about Rana and life in general. So
of course, man. All right, well, stay safe out there. Good luck at any upcoming tournaments, and I'm sure we'll have you back on at some point soon.
I would love it. Thanks, Chris.
All right, peace out, Card.
See ya.
Yeah. All right, big thank you to Andrew Card for coming on the podcast and blessing us with his knowledge and opinions. Always fun to catch up with someone that I'm usually running into all the time on the circuit, but in these times, unfortunately not. As someone who's a defensively minded player and also incredibly talented and using finesse and a lot of fancy plays and stuff like that, I just really value his opinion on what we want to do to push the sport forward. So thanks for coming on and sharing that with all of us. Thanks again to the Chorn store for bringing us here today. It's a collection of items that I use almost every single day along my spikeball journey that I know will be helpful to you too, and all brought to you through the convenience of Amazon. Today's featured product at the beginning of the podcast was Liquid IV, the hydration multiplier, and our end recommendation here is Athletic Greens, which is something that I actually pair with my Liquid IV every single morning. Athletic Greens is 75 amazing ingredients that basically get you all of your macros and nutrition for the entire day in just one simple scoop. I've tried a zillion of these green powders in an attempt to not have to worry about getting all of my fruits and vegetables, especially while I'm on the go traveling. And this is the only one that I can stand, let alone enjoy. So highly recommend Athletic Greens here. Pairs really well with the Liquid IV, especially the lemon lime flavor. That one is my favorite. So feel free to pick that up today. It's available through the Chorn store and also through athleticgreens.com. I have a link that you can use in order to get a bonus 5 travel packs so that you can bring your health with you on the go while you're going as well. So if you're interested in picking that up as well, there will be a link in the description or the show notes to use that as well. Freebies are always welcome in this community. Thanks again for tuning in, guys. This was super awesome. In closing, let's go out and share our passions with the world. Let's go out and give something back to the spikeball community. Be a part of it. Don't just be someone that talks. Be someone that does something. And on the count of 3, let's let out a good old let's go. No matter where you are, commit. Yell it from the rooftops. 1, 2, 3. Let's go, baby!